Welcome to Crossroads. American ammunition may be at risk. Now, one of the key metals used to manufacture ammunition and other weaponry is antimony, and the Chinese Communist Party is now restricting the supply of that key material. This takes place on the heels of a U.S. report saying the United States may not be prepared for a large-scale war with China were it to happen, and also amid growing concerns over dependence on Chinese materials in the supply chain. The United States, to an extent, needs materials from China and has not yet established other ways of getting some of them. Now, first, let's go into these restrictions that are set to begin on September 15th. The Chinese Communist Party's Ministry of Commerce released a statement on Thursday saying that it will restrict the export of antimony, a material that hardens metals and also makes them flame retardant. Now, it's used in a wide range of military weapons like ammunition, night vision goggles, infrared sensors. And China is the world's leading producer of antimony. Now, according to U.S. Geological Survey data, China accounted for 48% of global antimony mine production in 2023. So it's not the only source, but it's one of the biggest ones. Now, the reason why the CCP is doing this, why are they doing it, right? Well, according to their statement, it's to, quote, better safeguard national security and fulfill international obligations such as non-proliferation. Reference, of course, to nuclear proliferation, where the Chinese Communist Party has stopped talks about getting rid of nuclear weapons and is notably threatening nuclear war and then accusing the U.S. of doing it. Now, it says that exports that adhere to relevant regulations will be allowed, but that the CCP opposes any country or region that uses, quote, items from China to engage in activities that undermine China's national sovereignty, security, and development interests. Now, what does that mean? The CCP is basically directing this at the United States. Well, not saying it's directed at the United States, and maybe NATO and Western Europe to an extent. Because, of course, the United States and Western Europe are supporting, again, Ukraine in its war against Russia. The CCP is supporting Russia in that war. And as Ukraine is now pushed into Russia and is actually getting some cards they can put on the table for a peace deal, because that's what they were lacking, notably, the CCP seems to be very unhappy about this. Now, remember, the Chinese Communist Party was blocking the peace deal, right? The CCP was encouraging countries to not go and meet with Ukraine to talk about any kind of peace deal. And the CCP instead was trying to get Zelensky to agree to its deal. The problem Zelensky had was that what is he going to have to bet on? What does he have to play other than ending the war? Is he going to say, okay, we'll surrender this territory if you give us back this one? What does he have to bet on? What does he have to negotiate on? Nothing. Now that they've pushed into Russia, they have some cards to play. The Chinese Communist Party seems very unhappy about this, and notably Russia doesn't seem like it's able to properly deal with that situation. And so given this, Ukraine actually kind of changed the tides of the war. The CCP seems very unhappy about that. The other side of it, of course, has to do with what's happening in the South China Sea. U.S. supporting the Philippines, notably. The Philippines aligning with Japan. Japan also working alongside Taiwan now. And that whole defensive alliance that's being built is a direct threat in the CCP's eyes. And so the Chinese Communist Party is blaming the United States for supplying weapons to Taiwan to help Taiwan not attack the CCP, but defend itself were the CCP to attack. They're not very happy about this. And so what's happening right now when the CCP talks about growing threats and things that undermine its interests and so on, it's a reference to these things. And the CCP is notably now restricting a material that's needed to create this ammunition and other things. But it's probably not going to work out too well for China, and I'll explain in a bit. Now, look, at the moment, we're not clear as to what extent they will block the export of antimony. Again, they're not quite saying it clearly. But the wording from the CCP is pretty indicative of what they're trying to do. Terms like safeguard national security, non-proliferation, development interests. They're all ways the CCP is saying this is about growing military tensions between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party, and also the trade war, because it's not just the international conflicts, it's also like, U.S. restrictions on semiconductors, and the CCP looking for things that it can hold in kind of a tit-for-tat kind of move, right? Now look, even though the statement the CCP says that these policies are not targeted at any specific country or region, it's almost without a doubt targeted at the United States. And I think it's kind of clear on the surface, frankly. Now, this will very likely just speed up a trend that's already starting. Now, on the other side of this, ironically, what the CCP is doing will not make the United States just stop manufacturing ammunition or stop making night vision goggles or infrared or anything. It's just going to look for other supply chains. And if the CCP is supplying, 48%, that means there's other places that do it. And the U.S. is trying to even create trade deals with certain Middle Eastern countries and Middle Asian countries and so on, looking to increase the production of rare earth minerals and other things. It's just going to speed up that process. And they can also look at existing facilities and mines and so on that produce it and just make them increase output. Because one of the problems they have oftentimes is the CCP just undercuts them on the market. It's not that they can't manufacture more of something in many cases, it's that it's not financially feasible to manufacture more. And so by putting restrictions on this, ironically what the CCP has ended up doing is forcing foreign countries, not even just businesses, entire countries, to begin looking at their supply chain threats. And when it comes to not even just antimony, but other key materials, this is going to be taken into account. Because what's going to be happening now that the CCP has done this is they will say, if we have a conflict with China, if they're, and notably we're in a state right now of increased conflicts and increased hostilities from the CCP, notably, the CCP is, of course, backing Iran. It's backing, of course, Latin American dictatorships, including, for example, in Venezuela, where it backed Maduro, while the U.S. backed the opposition party as the winners of the election. The Chinese Communist Party is positioning itself against the United States in almost every major region right now. So the trend is more conflict, not less. It's more tension, not less tension. Given that situation, the United States will look and say, well, you're cutting off our access to something we need. Well, it's this one today. What if it's this other one tomorrow? And so they need to, because of this, begin thinking about the future of our supply chain stability. Would we have the iron we need to, of course, continue production of different things? Would we have the different types of ores? There's a lot of them. Would we have the other rare earth minerals? What happens if the CCP tries to cut off our access to medications? All of these things will be taken into account alongside this. Now, there's something else going on. Even going back to the Obama administration, right? It was under Obama, it was under Trump, it's actually even under Biden. They were talking about supply chain threats. And notably, this is what happened. There were studies done during the Obama administration where the U.S. military realized that we were dependent to an extent on the Chinese Communist Party for certain types of materials needed to manufacture a lot of our military equipment. The big buzzword going around was supply chain threats. And they wanted to find a way to make sure our military was able to function were a conflict with China to take place. Because remember, during the Obama administration, they did the Asia pivot, right? Where they began moving different military assets to the Asia-Pacific region. That was when the United States notably started doing freedom of navigation operations as the CCP laid claim to most of the South China Sea. Now, given that situation, of course, it was taken into account that the military at the time, our fighter jets, our tanks, just about everything, was to an extent reliant on components from China. This wasn't just metals or things like that. It was even minute pieces within some of the electronics equipment. Now, the full report was never publicly released, but what was released, the redacted report, suggested that there might be some kind of internal systems that maybe were non-functional in even American fighter jets, and that could even be remotely turned off were a conflict to happen. That raised some serious concerns over whether the CCP, in the event of a war, because of our reliance on it for many of these components, could just hit a switch and turn off our jets, for example. That was the big concern at the time. Now, they said over the course of time that they got rid of the biggest threats, but to an extent they never fully resolved the full supply chain threat. Again, they tried doing it under Obama, they tried doing it under Trump, and it's still a buzzword under Biden. And what we're seeing right now is an example of a very real supply chain threat. One of the things that was warned about that the CCP could hypothetically do back in 2010, they're actually doing now, where they've cut off access to the U.S. On a key material needed to manufacture military equipment. Now look, this is also similar to something else, and the timing of this is important as well. The Chinese Communist Party back in that time as well, 2010-ish, the CCP laid claim to the Senkaku Islands. That's in the East China Sea. It's an island owned by Japan. The CCP claims ownership over it. Then the Chinese Communist Party declared an ADIZ, an Air Defense Identification Zone, where it, again, made it so that if airplanes fly through that region, they had to call China, ask permission to fly through it. Then they extended that and laid claim to essentially the entire South China Sea. Now, when the CCP did that, they did something else, and this is what kind of started this whole debate. They cut off Japan's access to rare earth minerals. They used access to rare earth minerals as a kind of trade weapon. And Japan at the time was not really building up its military. It was post-World War II Japan, and they had a lot of laws in place restricting that. They've since changed most of that. But cutting off rare earth minerals to Japan did something else. It damaged their high-tech industry, because Japan then, even more so than now actually, was one of the biggest manufacturers of high-tech equipment, electronics and so on. And so cutting that off put a huge dent in the Japanese economy. And when the CCP did that, that was what set off alarms in the United States and Europe and elsewhere, saying, wow, the CCP is a type of trade weapon, right? During a conflict, would cut off access to a key material that is necessary to sustain a country's economy. That is what set off the alarm bells. Interestingly now, the trend that began at the time, trying to secure these supply chains, finding other sources of them, the CCP has just sealed its fate in terms of other countries being forced now to find other sources. Now look, this is also happening on the heels of a congressional report that notably found the United States may not have the ammunition that it needs to fight a large-scale war with China, not just ammo, but other things as well. They're suggesting we need factories, we need domestic manufacturing, we need the entire supply chains that you need to manufacture equipment. The steel and the equipment and the rare earth minerals that you need to build a tank or a jet were a war to take place. And they're talking again about domestic because were a war to happen, well, if you need to import key materials from abroad, there's going to be major military targets. Keeping it within the United States or maybe Canada or somewhere else would be needed in order to have a secure supply chain. Now that the CCP has done this, it has again sped up the, let's say, the emergency mindset that we need to find other sources and secure those sources. Now look, it's not only ammunition. According to that report, it said this, quote, "In many ways, China is outpacing the United States and has largely negated the U.S. military advantage in the Western Pacific through 2 decades of focused military investment. Without significant change by the United States, the balance of power will continue to shift in China's favor." Again, a shot over the bow. The United States now understands the war that it's in with China, essentially. This, war by other means, not necessarily a hot war, at least not yet. Now, meanwhile, and despite all the policies the CCP has tried to use to save its economy, recent data suggests that it's not working. I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges with a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold. You can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. The U.S.-China trade war is now going after our ammunition. The Chinese Communist Party is planning to restrict antimony. It's a key material that's used to manufacture ammo and other military-grade weapons, not just for China, but worldwide. And why is the CCP doing this? Well, according to its own Ministry of Commerce, it's to better safeguard its national security, sovereignty, and development interests. Now, this happens as the Chinese Communist Party is in somewhat of a crisis right now. The CCP, they've tried multiple measures to save their economy, but recent data suggests that it's not working. Reuters said this: China's new home prices fell at their fastest pace in 9 years in July, as a slew of support policies failed to stabilize prices and restore confidence in the struggling property sector. It says the prolonged housing market slump has weighed heavily on the world's second largest economy and its consumers, with analysts saying Beijing's 5% GDP target, what they keep saying, for 2024, may be too ambitious, even as other economic gauges have steadied. Now look, they're saying it's the lowest in 9 years and still declining. And that lowest in 9 years and still declining is despite the fact the CCP over the last year or so has tried everything to save its economy. So what does that tell you? If they've tried everything to save their economy and it's its lowest in 9 years, it means that not only have these things failed to save the economy, but that the downward trend is continuing even with everything they're doing to try to prop it up. Imagine, for example, a sandcastle collapsing and you have your hands trying to hold it together and it's falling through your fingers. That is where the Chinese economy is right now. All the support mechanisms in place, and they've had a lot, including notably proposals to even buy up property from the CCP itself, just having them buy it up. None of it is working. Programs to, again, try to push money throughout the society, everything they've tried, and they've done some really drastic measures over the last few months, in general. None of it is working. Now, under normal circumstances, you would expect at least kind of a momentary illusion of stability if you're putting all these extra supports in place to try to hold something up. Despite all those extra supports, the trend is still downward, the worst in 9 years. And so that means that without the supports, it's probably even worse than before, but it also means the supports themselves, they're not working. Now look, it doesn't end there either. Financial Times said this. It said China's industrial production weakened in July, and a challenge for policymakers relying on the sector to help drive growth and offset a property slowdown weighing on the world's second largest economy. Because again, we're talking about the two major industries of China. Housing, right, the real estate industry, about a third of their economy, and then manufacturing and exports, about another third. We talked first about, of course, the housing market and so on, and how that's still crumbling. But also the exports and the manufacturing are failing. Internally, they're having problems where they can't get people to buy, right? They're having a consumption problem. Externally, they're also having trouble getting people to buy. Now look, remember, the Chinese Communist Party is trying to revive domestic manufacturing. That's the whole slogan going around after the third plenum and the ways they want to try to save the economy. It's all about domestic production, making the CCP build everything itself. People were saying, notably, right, if you read a lot of the news outlets and what they're saying about China after that, exports are up, exports are up. Of course, it's true, the CCP was increasing exports, but the reason why they're doing it is important. People were saying exports are up, hey, there's a larger output in China, hey, maybe that's a sign things are getting better. It was kind of a half-truth in such a way that it was deeply misleading. Right? They were saying things were getting better, but it was misleading for a key reason. Look, of course things were looking better for exports for a very short time, but the reason why is important. The problem for the CCP is they had overcapacity. They had to dump products on outside markets. That was why Europe and the United States were putting anti-dumping measures on China. What did they do? They dumped it on Africa, they dumped it on Latin America, they dumped it throughout Asia. They didn't dump it as much in the US or in Europe, they dumped it elsewhere. Now look, of course, if they had overcapacity, in other words, they manufactured too much of something, right? The warehouses just had too much stuff on them. The CCP built too much, what happens, right? Well, if you have a factory and you produce 3 times what the market wants, what happens to the factory? Well, obviously you stop production because you have overcapacity. Stop it until you can sell it at least, otherwise you're going to have even more of it. And if you build more of it, what happens to the prices? Well, the prices fall through the floor. You've created too much of a good. And when something is no longer scarce, it loses its value. Right? The prices of the product go down, which we're seeing notably in Chinese steel. We're seeing it notably in a lot of Chinese EVs and batteries and other things because they need to get rid of them. They can't have them sitting in their warehouses. Now, what happens when you lower the prices? You drop the prices through the floor because you're trying to get rid of the overcapacity. Well, obviously people buy it, right? Obviously it's easier to sell because it's dirt cheap. Now, again, Europe and the United States put some measures in place to prevent dumping, right? They call it anti-dumping measures to stop that, but other countries didn't. Obviously now, if the CCP is trying to get rid of this overcapacity, exports would be momentarily up. But what happens once they get rid of the overcapacity, get rid of all the extra goods? Well, obviously, exports are going to drop. And that's what we're seeing now. And for some reason, you have these news outlets saying, hey, exports are up, yay, let's all pour our money into China. And then after they get rid of the overcapacity, hey, exports are down, what's happening? Well, obviously, again, they had to dump the products in foreign markets, right? They were dumping their products. Obviously, exports are up. Once the dumping is over, what happens? Exports are down. That's where we're at right now. And so, in other words, the measures on the, again, industries in China also are not working. And the CCP now, with real estate and exports, they're feeling the pain of this. What happens then also if factory workers can't work? What happens also if they're no longer selling the goods because exports are suddenly down? Well, people have less money. People can't buy houses. People can't buy basic products. So what do? Well, they look to security rather than luxury. And they begin, battening down the hatches and getting ready for a crisis. That is where things are at right now. It's a process that will wither itself until some large force comes in to save it. But everything they've tried to save it has failed. The CCP, they have another internal push right now. It's trying to clear red tape to make it easier for people to get married. But the problem is many people, they're checking out. They're laying flat, right? They're not getting themselves involved in any part of the society. And that includes a decision to not get married. Now, as this happens, the pressure is also growing at the social level in China. And the Chinese Communist Party is responding to this growing social pressure with a heavy hand, likely making it even worse. One of the recent examples of this is the Chinese Communist Party deploying its SWAT team on delivery drivers. Now, I'll be talking more about this only on EpochTV.com. So if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, X, Rumble, there's a link in the description below. Click on that. You'll get access to the rest of this episode, as well as our whole library of shows, our hard-hitting documentaries on issues that really matter, like the Chinese Communist Party's 100-year plan to defeat the United States. The CCP is one of the biggest threats to America. They're using things like propaganda, video games, entertainment, movies, culture to subvert and influence the next generation. This unrestricted war against our country, it's one of the scariest but least understood issues of our time because it's not tangible. It's being done through soft power and ideological subversion. Now, I've spent over a decade investigating the CCP's subversion, and it's such an important issue that I made a documentary called The Final War. It exposes this 100-year plot of the Chinese Communist Party to try to take down America. If you'd like to find out more about what the CCP is doing and what they're plotting against this country, watch The Final War. You can find the link in the description below, and I'll show you all the trailer before we go exclusively to EpochTV.com for the rest of this episode. I'll see you there.
The greatest threat facing the United States is the CCP.
The Epoch Times investigation team had studied the CCP for years, but what we uncovered was yielding evidence beyond our imagination.
With Chairman Mao, with the Prime Minister, our talks have been characterized by frankness.
The Clinton administration said, oh, don't worry about it. This will be a poison pill for China.
China's strategic goal is to make sure that the U.S. has 4 enemies, and one of them must be a terrorist group.
We are giving of our life's blood so that the Chinese Communist Party can survive and thrive.